Knowing this near universal pattern helps to assess new brands and existing ones.
What don't marketers know?
Quite a lot. Marketers largely live in an anything-goes world where the latest fashion or fad drives an awful lot of practice.
Segmentation is the recognition you can't serve everyone with equal satisfaction.
This is the Zach Ansbury Show.
Welcome. On today's podcast clip, we have Associate Professor Benedetta Christofouli from Birkbeck, University of London, United Kingdom.
Yeah, so you're a very strong researcher, so I'm pretty excited to speak to you about your research. Mm-hmm. I know you said Google Scholar is not super important at your university, but you do have quite a few Google Scholar citations and an impressive H index. Like I said, that's what we get based on, so that's the sort of stuff I look at. The article that I want to talk about today is called Competence is Power. How digital influencers impact buying decisions in B2B markets. So you were published, I think you said a 3A for you in your system, but it's an A star here, which is our top journals in the industrial marketing management, and you published it in 2022. This kind of stood out for me in a few ways. First, you were the first author, so I thought you read this article very well. Second, it was in a top journal. Third, it's getting really good citations for how long it's been there. And fourth, it's a topic that people love, right? Influence is very big, very topical. And that novelty in the B2B section, really stood out to me. So, I'd love to talk to you about the articles.
Sure.
The thing that I find fascinating about research is this idea always stems from somewhere. Like, what was the trigger point for this is going to be a great paper? Let's start writing this.
Okay, maybe I should start by saying that you never get that sense this is going to be a great paper. At least I don't. It's like you get a sense that this is going somewhere. Yeah. This is going to be liked, and this is going to be, reviewers will buy into it. But you never get, at least I don't. And I've had papers where my expectations were so high and got completely demolished by reviewers. So the papers, in my view, those papers should have been in really, really top marketing journals and ended up in ABS 3 instead. So it's kind of a funny one, right? In answer to your question specifically, I think you are asking how the idea came about. What was the hook or the answer of?
Yeah, how did the idea come about?
It was a mix of things. So in 2020, we had written a paper in Journal Business Research on influencers and influencers in crisis. And so the idea there was very much, if I leverage on a partnership with influencers in order to turn sentiment around when I am undergoing a crisis as an organization because I've been accused of some kind of misconduct, is that the right strategy to go, or does it backfire? And we were very excited because at the time, if you see, I've done a review of literature in influencer research, not just marketing, because other fields have picked on influencer marketing also in computer science. And so if you see the trajectory, 2020 has been the year when you see the curve going up. So it's from 2020 that things started picking up year on year. And so in 2020, that paper was quite novel. And we thought, wait, this is really picking up. This is going to pick up as an area, and we can be at the forefront of this. Mm-hmm. So let's do more on this, right? So that was the idea. The reviewers liked the paper very much. The review process was very pleasant in a way. So we thought maybe we should build on this. And then around about a year later, we had published in IMM with a former colleague from Cranfield, Radu, where we were not looking at influencer marketing, we were looking at social innovation. So if businesses need to choose between an offering that is not made of recycled components, or it's not circular in any way. Doesn't have any social impact, versus one that has. What is the process that guides them into choosing the social innovation one, and what seems to be working when you're launching a social innovation? What seems to be working best? And so in that particular paper, the reason why I'm mentioning that paper is because we were looking into a novel area in business-to-business markets, and we had tested some theory from consumer research that had been applied in consumer research and tried to test it in a business-to-business domain. And it worked really well as well. So we thought maybe, there is something going on here. On top of it, we had been monitoring what is happening in the space of influencer marketing, and we realized that actually this whole area of digital marketing is not something that is very specific to business to consumers, because it's happening in business to business as well. And a lot of we then started digging into the business to business literature, and what you see is a lot of the literature based on some mostly qualitative studies tries to understand how do companies in business to business use social media. Do they use social media with their salespeople? Do they what is their level of usage of social media? How do they? So we thought, well, really saying that they use social media is not telling us very much. So maybe we can make a contribution by being a little bit more specific, looking into one very novel trend, which is the use of influencers by companies in business to business markets, and be very specific about how that can be used by companies, vendor companies that want to sell offerings to other businesses that are meant to be acquiring those. And so in the review process, we were even asked, can you put together a table that you can sort of showcase what's happening in the field? So we did like secondary research into what are the latest in business to business market when it comes to using and leveraging influencer partnerships. So we have a table, I think, towards the end with that. So it was a mix of those. So we thought, this is interesting. That hasn't been looked at. It can build on our profile that we are building expertise in the influencer marketing domain, and it will be novel for IMM because it looks like research was picking up on social media usage, but wasn't quite going into influencer marketing yet. And so that could be a way forward. So we started putting together, brainstorm some idea as to how we could approach that on the basis of the secondary research that we had done. And we thought, well, one of the key things that is quite important for these companies is, okay, you want to use influencer marketing, but how to do so? How do you select an influencers? What, is that even going to work? So those are the questions that we had in mind that we wanted to try and address.
And by we, so who were you co-authors for this paper?
Yeah, so it was myself. There was Jay Van Singh, and we, as I said, we had done a paper together in 2020, also influencer marketing. And there was Latoya. Latoya is a former PhD student of Jay. She had an interest in digital marketing. She was at a stage of her career where she was trying to build up her profile to be able to move into an academic career and make, progression there. And so it was a good opportunity for her to come on board and, get a good paper in a good journal out of it. And also she was very motivated and very keen to, for instance, she looked after the design, putting together the questionnaire and experimental manipulations, as well as getting her hands dirty a little bit with the analysis, helping with, putting together some parts of the paper, etc. So, I think that the team worked well. So.
Yeah, and building a solid research team is actually super important, right? And
it's super difficult.
It yes. Yeah. Important, difficult. Yes.
Now, difficult in the sense that I've had good and bad experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's the people that you keep working with, the ones that you do have that good experience with, and that complementary skill. So if you can find like a good, team to continuously work with for years and years and years, I think, it's a huge, huge win, I think, in academia for sure. So you're talking a lot about, how you were building up skills in this area and how influencers were starting to emerge in the literature around 2020, and you have expertise in that. And I still find the novelty of B2B influencers something outside of my realm, right? I'm not a B2B researcher. I didn't even know those existed until I read your paper, which is pretty cool. So why did you think this research needed to be undertaken, this specific research? Was it for those reasons, or?
I mean, one could argue, and reviewers would always have that in the back of their mind, if there is research in B2C, then are you just looking at another context? So why do you even need to bother? I think that, it's a fair question. We should be asking ourselves these questions. But our answer to that question was, wait, in B2B, things are different. And if you see also, if you read the literature, we have read literature, and at the time, literature was speaking up in business to consumers around the idea that influencers, as long as they are trustworthy or have an image of being trustworthy or being attractive, they tend, especially attractiveness, they are successful in building what the literature calls parasocial relationships. So you are building some kind of relationship with these social media personalities, almost like you would do with a celebrity seen on TV. So it's similar to some research in advertising research that talked about parasocial relationships built through media, through TV. And now, you could argue that that makes sense for consumers. It does make sense when it comes to, you having to purchase any type of simple product, a beauty product, and trying to search for some advice online. And maybe you get into an influencer that is a big enthusiast about a particular, type of makeup or something. And you get to follow that influencer and eventually get to see also their personal life, for instance. When it comes to B2B, things are slightly different. Why? You have two parties. So you have a vendor and you have a client. Usually it's the vendor that wants to sell the offering to the client that needs to somehow leverage on some form of social media, including influencer marketing. And the client that needs to make a decision most likely is making that decision as part of being in a buying center. So needs to make the decision by having the sign off from people maybe more senior than him or her, and needs to take that decision by consulting various different people. But most importantly, it's a decision that by nature, because you don't tend to buy the single product, you might have to buy in bulk. It's a decision that has inherently more risk because financially it's also different. So on that premise, in our view, the complexities and the mechanism by which an influencer could potentially be effective at shaping the decisions of purchasing managers was different. So it was all about trying to reduce some level of uncertainty, some level of risk that people have about whether the product will perform, the offering will perform as it should, and you are taking the advice from somebody that seems to be genuine and have good intent and seems to know what it's talking about. So I think on that premise, we thought, well, there is a case here, and reviewers did seem to agree on that idea. And it was one part of the review process is laying down clearly who are the actors, and because we initially, we just assumed in the way we wrote the paper that, reviewers will know what we're talking about. But actually, there was a lot of refinement in defining actors and what exactly is the mechanism going from where to where, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. So really, I think fascinating sort of study. How did you go about collecting data in that?
Data.
Two studies, right?
Yes, both experiment. I mean, IMM is an interesting journal. It's a lot of the literature, maybe not the journal in general, business to business as a tradition of collecting a lot of qualitative data. So a lot of qualitative studies where you are speaking to salespeople, key account managers, or and it's very insightful, very managerially relevant most times. For us, we did not discard that option, although first, most of our research is experimental. Second, we thought what we're really interested in here is if we are able to pinpoint exactly what elements of an influencer presentation and impression the influencer makes when providing that endorsement or supporting that offering is more effective relative to what. So if we are able to do a comparison and be able to assess in some, call it clean way, which element of their presentation seems to be working most effectively in creating a certain impression to purchasing managers when deciding about the offering. I mean, it's not a method without limitations. You could argue that you still want to do maybe some further studies to assess, to reinforce and strengthen external validity. That is comment well taken. But the idea of doing the two experiments is because in the first you are trying to assess first the main effect, so whether there is really a difference in the impression that the influencer is able to convey and how those are affecting decision making on the part of the purchasing managers representing the client organization, and how that process works. So what is the psychological process that by which that impression influences decision making? And in the second one, we try to test conditions under which the effect holds or doesn't. So it is, most cases, it's never black and white, right? There are always conditions under which certain mechanism works, and more or less. So we were trying to pinpoint those.
And I guess ultimately, what did you find? What was the main effect? And then...
So I think the findings are quite simple in a way. So
findings tend to be.
Say it again. Most
findings tend to be, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite simple in a way that we were able to identify that when influencers are trying to endorse an offering from a vendor, in the way they are, it's important the way they are presenting themselves, and that has implications for what vendors need to do when they're thinking of selecting one that can represent their offering. So in particular, there is one trait that if influencers are able to emphasize in their profiling, and that is their level of competence as in having the expertise, but also having a certain status in the digital online community in being able to give advice about complex business solutions. In our case, our context was technological solution. You could argue that maybe further research needs to look into whether that applies to other types of business solutions. So competence seems to be more important than warmth. Warmth as in being perceived as an enthusiast, being perceived as a friendly person. And that is interesting in itself because the literature in influencer marketing emphasizes a lot the element of friendliness. You have, as an influencer, you have social leadership. That social leadership is you are you are a personality that is attractive, that comes across as very friendly, as very hands-on, that almost on par with consumers. So in the case of business to business markets, that element doesn't seem to be particularly important. And the reason why is not is because of the mechanism of reducing uncertainty. So the more you are able to come across as somebody efficient, skilled, competent, that has status, makes purchasing managers feel that they are taking less risk in choosing the offering you are endorsing, and potentially build a relationship with the company, the vendor that manufactures that offering, that sells that offering. That is, however, and that's where the boundary condition come into play. It's particularly prominent when the person that is making that decision, that purchase decision from the client company, is not perceiving particularly, doesn't identify himself or herself with the influencer. What it means is doesn't identify to have the same aligned goals with the influence. What it means that if I identify very much with the influence, everything else is irrelevant. If you are competent, you're warmth, both of them are important equally. There is no particular concern about your expertise or your skills. But if I don't have that confidence of being able to identify myself with who you are, then I need to rely on other cues. And that's where competence becomes prominent and conspicuous and important. So you are leveraging on alternative cues when you are lacking a perception that, okay, this you can identify yourself in this person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's really, really kind of cool. So you built on a whole bunch of literature. So I guess what would the outtakes for other academics be, whether it's the way that they would then shape their own research or the key takeaways that they maybe could build on themselves? What do you think the key takeaway for other academics?
I think the most important, I would say, is that this sets the precedent for more research in influencer marketing in a business-to-business market domain. So I would say when we published this in 2022, this was very much the first paper that looked into influencer marketing in business-to-business markets. And I think there is a wealth of knowledge to further explore, not least because, as I've said earlier, when it comes to business-to-business markets, there are a number of complexities involved into how decisions are made inside organizations, who makes them. Is it one individual? We have only looked at the perspective of purchasing managers, people who usually make this purchase decision on behalf of their organizations. But typically, and maybe for other type of purchases that are not technological offerings, there are more people that come into the process that need to have a say. So I think that opens up a number of avenues that are important. But in general, this sets the precedent for more research into this area. I think theoretically also pinpoints that the mechanism by which influencers work in business-to-business market is indeed different. and the element of risk and uncertainty reaction is at play, as it often is in business-to-business markets, even when you're dealing with these social media personalities that seem to be building parasocial relationship based on what we know from consumer research. So
absolutely. And what about if you were, working in industry? What should I be taking out of this research?
I think the implications are mainly, in my view, and I think we have pointed them in the paper as well, is mainly for two stakeholders, I would say. One is the vendors. So when you are seeking to promote an offering and doing it online, if you're thinking of leveraging on influencer partnerships, then the paper and the findings are kind of giving some steering into what aspects you might want to consider in deciding which influencer to select. And the stereotypes, so the impressions, stereotypical traits of influencers, the ones of competence and work, do seem to be important, especially the competence one. The second one, also for vendors, is the question of, how do I capture identification? So sometimes it's not easy to capture, so you might have to use proxies for it. But being able to know who you are talking to, it's important, because that means competence might be more or less relevant. And if you are an influencer yourself that wants to build reach and wants to build leads into business to business domain, working with vendor companies, then it's about how you present yourself, how you prepare to be perceived and create an impression of competence, and also promote that in the way you are building your profile and your image online. So I think these are the main takeaways, I would say.
Yeah, I love that last insight, because I kept thinking, like, as you were talking about your research, like, this really helps you pick which influencer you want to use. But then flipping that and being like, if I'm an influencer, how do I want to pitch myself and present myself to the world? I think that's really cool insights. Really, really cool. So you did this in 2012, and you said you're at the forefront of this. So, I mean, if you're working on a paper, you don't have to give that away. But what would you you like to do in this situation going forward? Whether it's the same research team or.
I mean, are you suggesting what would you do next in the influencer space, or
keep building in this research area?
Yeah, I mean, we got British Academy. We got a British Academy small grant. Jay is also on the paper. I'm the principal investigator, but it's a team effort, and we are first doing some work around mapping out the domain and where is it going and where are areas for avenues for further research. And a second part is also looking into some of the under-researched, potentially, caveats of this whole phenomenon when it comes to what influencers are and what is their impact on receivers. So it's still very much work in progress. We have gathered data, we're putting together the papers, so I don't have anything published to share, but it's definitely something happening there. And I personally, I would also like to continue working on this. There are very many dimensions that the phenomena that are still left unexplored in the phenomenon, about this phenomenon. And one aspect is that I'm hoping that eventually I will be able to maybe get some funding to look into influencer as a job, and what it means as a profession, and what are some of the pros and cons of this profession. And so that there is a lot more to explore, and I hope that maybe when we have our conceptual paper out, there will be a very clear list of avenues for further work that people can build on.
Yeah, it sounds like a rich source, that's for sure. So thank you for sharing that research with us.
No problem.
You know, I love reading research papers. I guess it's a perk of the job that's what we get paid to do. But always hearing the insights and the nuances from usually the lead author is, I don't know, I find it so valuable.
Hi everyone, Zach here again, and just a few quick reminders before you go. If you're listening to the podcast and are considering incorporating it into your secondary school or university courses, then please let me know and I can guide you through the process. If you're enjoying the show and getting some insights from it, then please leave me a 5-star review on your podcast listening platform. It would go a long way to spreading the word. If you know someone who would benefit from this content, then I would be thrilled if you could consider sharing this episode and its knowledge with them. And finally, thank you for becoming part of the community for this show.